work down throughout the U.S. and Southern Ontario. And it was with great pleasure when I saw this request for proposal come out to help out the Algoma farmers that it was nothing but a pleasure working on this project and working with all of you and your feet and your input. I just want to make a note that a study like this could not have been possible without the funders. And I wanted to identify Pinokian Hills Farms, Northern Ontario Heritage, FedNor, and then as part of RAIN, Nordic, and the Innovation Center. Just a run through of the agenda of the presentation. It should take about a half hour, front to back. The purpose of the study, district overview. I think a lot of you already understand the challenges that you have, but we'll just briefly touch on them. The survey distribution results, drainage infrastructure, options and considerations. Part of the study was originally a tile drainage study, and as we got talking with Errol and David, thought there was a lot of advantage in terms of if we're already going out to the farmers to get input, let's also look into storage as well, recognizing that that's part of the infrastructure for farmers. We looked at return on investments. Everybody wants to invest. Nobody wants to be putting in money in a losing opportunity. We're going to look at past and current funding opportunities through the various government institutes, job creation potential, and proposed funding considerations. Purpose of the study, basically infrastructure investment in drainage, storage infrastructure is a major impediment to agricultural expansion and diversification. The study was in essence, identifying agricultural lands that would benefit from tile installation. We sent out surveys. We need to get a feedback as to how much interest there was in tile fields. Provide an economic cost and benefit analysis associated with tile drainage. Provide options for reducing the cost of tile drainage. We recognize that the cost for installation is pretty high, around $1,100 to $1,100 an acre. And a description of the current funding programs and opportunities. Basically, the agenda that we're going to go through. And the whole purpose of the study is to strengthen local agricultural infrastructure and economy and support the greater mission of becoming a sustainable Algoma. Now, in the 1990s, the word of the time was green. But in 2000s, it's all about sustainability. And there's going to be more of a movement, both locally and throughout the world. It seems to be the big key. We finalized, well, it's still in draft. We're going to finalize it actually in the upcoming days, but the report is about 1.5 inches thick. It comes with a lot of attachments, and what I'm going to do is try to summarize that and save yourself reading it within this presentation. District overview, Algoma. There's a lot of Precambrian bedrock, thin deposits on top, and it's no surprise that the predominant farmlands are along the southern limit of the Agoma district, in the outwash plains of the Highway 17 corridor adjacent to the North Shore. When you look at the total amount of, and OMAF has this figure, there's 32,782 hectares of existing available farmland. And the majority of the land, as I mentioned, is along the southern Algoma district, where there's minimal to no drainage relief. Obviously, it's relatively flat. There's not much topography. And if you take the population of Algoma, which is about 115,000, and assuming a food consumption of 3,800 calories per day, that's a North American diet, and that 3,800 calories equates to about 0.4 hectares, an acre per person, you could realize that for Algoma to be sustainable, we need about 46,348 hectares of productive farmland. And if you look at the math, we need more land, we need more available farmland. So in summary, the existing farmland within the district is insufficient to support the district's population. And I need to also flag that additional lands can be, our number for 32,782, that is existing farmland. And that number could be increased with additional land clearing. So the goal is to maximize the growth potential of existing farmland by improving drainage infrastructure and additional clearing as a means of supporting the local food and cash crop initiatives while also helping Algoma to become self-sufficient and sustainable. And as we get into, we need to, when we look at this whole study, we need to look at infrastructure, farming, whether it's drainage or tree cutting. It's just as important when we look at highways, bridges, we have to look at farms as being a necessary infrastructure to our economy. Climate. Is there much to be said about this summer? Okay, when you look at climate, this is historical records. The last frost-free day is usually mid to late May, and within our district, in October the 8th, the 13th. David has great numbers when it comes down to crop peak, past crop peak numbers, and a lot of this information. But what we should be really aware of is the climate's changing. No surprise, right? There's climate change, global warming. We had a state of emergency in Johnson Plummer, a local emergency within Huron Shores. We had the washout of the culvert by Colin's house, and storm information meetings east of the city. And hopefully none of you had properties like this, where you had, you did? Hay bales flooded, and really feel for you. Like, working against the climate is especially in Northern Ontario, I think it goes towards the challenges for northern farmers. When you read this, you almost want to say, why are we farming at all? Competition. When you were getting a lot of fruits and vegetables from Southern Ontario and from abroad. Harsher climates, distance to markets, shorter growing season, transportation challenges, access to licensed contractors. The 100 licensed tile drain contractors are all in Southern Ontario. One is just moved up into the Espanola area. Smaller available acreages and farms. In Southern Ontario, obviously, they have a lot of farms that are 1,000 acres and a lot more, but here in Northern Ontario, they're a lot smaller, and we'll see those statistics from the survey feedback that we got. Access to supplies and equipment, absence of customs operations. So there's lots of challenges, and it's, being a farmer in Northern Ontario, it's no surprise when you look at the farm census statistics from OMAF. In 1966, there was 650 census farms. In 1981, about 15 years later, there was 490. And in 2011, it dropped to 317. Seeing a declining trend, and there's a lot that goes behind it. There's with regards to the markets and dairy and the various associations. Many of the former agricultural lands currently used as farms have been incorporated into larger farms or are unattended and or abandoned. The migration of new farmers to Algoma in the early 2000s has resulted in some of the traditional local agricultural land becoming attended and revived. And we have basically the Mennonites and Amish to thank, because the land prices in Southern Ontario are getting so expensive that they're coming up here to get some more room and get some more land so that they could farm. So in 2000s, we're starting to see a slow, it's an increasing trend. And with farmland within Algoma, it generally goes for about $800 to $1,600 an acre, compared to Southern Ontario, which is $10,000 to $18,000. That's quite a significant difference. Many of you might be already aware of the survey. I think all of you would have submitted one. We basically asked everything from your basic name and contact information, properties owned and leased. And what we did was we asked for GPS coordinates. We've asked for addresses, because we had to try to put it on a map, and I'll show you after. We have a GIS system, a mapping, where we were able to actually locate all these parcels. And we also asked about storage, existing and need for increased storage. So as part of the survey, what we did was we outreached every township, municipality, First Nation. We identified, and obviously it was down along the north, the southern part of Algoma district that had all the farms. We utilized the Ontario Federation of Agriculture and the Christian Federation of Farmers of Ontario for sending out the mail-out list. So there was a first wave of surveys that was sent through both those organizations. We also sent another wave of surveys, because it was very important that we tried to hit every farmer within Algoma. For this survey to be successful, we needed to outreach to everyone, and unfortunately there is a one master list. So we had to get it from various directions. Farmland owners registered with MPAC. In every township we went through, we got the list. There were some township clerks that were more than happy to send out the surveys on our behalf. Others give us lists. So another wave of surveys were sent out that way. We had the help of the Ontario Soil Crop, Cattlemen's and Pasture Association spread the news of the survey. Those townships that had websites and newsletters, they helped put out the press release, and we sent out contact information posters throughout the North Shore. You may have seen it at many of the stores. We did the rain presentations back in early May and June, where we first sent out the surveys. And also we utilized the email distribution list through RAIN and OMAF. So, and Dave just touched upon it, of the 317 registered farmers, we got 84 to submit that return their surveys, which is a 25% return, which is relatively good when you think about it in terms of asking for, when it comes down to surveys, because we seem always inundated into polls and surveys. And many of the reasons for not returning forms, insufficient funds to install tile drains. I remember speaking to some people and they said, Rob, I can't even afford fixing my tractor, let alone installing tile drains. So that was one of the main excuses. Other ones were adequate drainage, no need for tile drainage. Like, why submit a form back if you don't have any drainage problems? Other expenses, as I mentioned, take priority. I got to spend money on the tractor as opposed to the farm. Retiring, leaving the farming business, and there was a good percentage of that. If you had to look at maybe the demographics, I would say about 10 to 20% of people are looking to exit the business, and it's very important that we have a farm succession plan. Lack of time, interest in submitting, and family emergencies as funerals. So again, the 25% was a good enough response that we're able to extrapolate and try to figure out some rhyme and reason with the numbers that we got back. We share the same challenges in terms of lack of drainage contractors, the high cost of tiling, adverse weather, and distant markets. I'd like to add to that the cost differential of tiling versus property is significant. When you look at the cost of property as being roughly $1,000 an acre, and you're tiling for $1,100 an acre, you're wondering, should I tile land or should I buy another acre? So it's very difficult to justify putting in tile drainage, but as we get into more of the presentation, you'll find that having a property that's untiled is equivalent of having a car that's an 8-cylinder but running on only 4 to 5 cylinders. You're not utilizing the full capacity of the property. And this is without putting any pesticides, herbicides, or anything like that. Just naturally, to improve drainage, and we'll see the numbers of 20 to 40% increased crop yield. It's, you want the full potential from your farms to be realized. So when we added up all the surveys, what we got was 90 properties equating to about 5,000 acres that actually requested tile drainage. And just by a show of hands within the room, how many people have requested tile drainage within this room? Okay, there's a few. Okay. And we're really happy. This was something I was updating both David and Errol as we were going through the process and trying to outreach and trying to get as many surveys back. You could appreciate how useless the survey would be if we got back 200 acres. It was like a waste of time. But 5,000 acres is significant. And it's enough to make people turn their heads, and especially contractors say, you know what, there is work up in Algoma District worthwhile to come up here. So based on a 25% return rate, if you remember, of the 317 Algoma farmers, if you were to multiply by 4, it is potential that we could have up to 20,000 acres of farmland that could require tile drainage. And an interesting note, that 26 properties, which represents 29%, which is about 1,253 acres, which is 25% of the 5,000 acres, are owned by religious orders. And when I say that, it's the Mennonites and the Amish. And the reason why I bring that up is they made it very explicit that they can't accept any grants. So their interest is having a low to no interest loan. So that's what they're looking for. And when we look at drainage demand by townships, you can see highest to lowest. Deborah Johnson, there's 27 properties. Huron Shores, 19. Bruce Mines, 12. 9 in Deborah. Deborah Tarbert. St. Joe's Island, there's 9, 7, and 7. And then, like I said, we've had some properties within the city of Sault Ste. Marie and Goulet River. And again, this is just a snippet of the GIS. If you could appreciate it, it's just a glorified geographical system on a computer which you could close and turn off layers. But what we did was, with all the surveys that came in, we located it based on the GPS coordinates, and we ranked them. In blue is 0 acres, yellow 1 to 30 acres, 30 to 50 in orange, and 50 plus in red. This represents those that need tile drainage. Okay, and the triangles represents those people that already have tile drains. So as you can see, here's a property that's over 50 acres. There's a lot within the Plummer Township in these areas. Huron Shores. So this helps when it comes down to if we had to go for bid. When a contractor looks at this and says, you know what, they could park their machine here and work here for a month straight and satisfy all these contractors. As I mentioned, we added storage as part of the tile drainage study. We've asked for what's existing and what are people requesting. There's 36 grain bins and there's 11 requested. 5 silos, another 1 requested. Dry barns, 25, 2 requested. Cold storage, flash freezing is a topic that a lot of people are kind of requesting. You can appreciate flash freezing and cold storage are a lot more expensive to install. And grain dryers, 5 grain dryers. Drainage, I think you all understand the importance of it. Just to kind of quickly recap, it restricts aeration of soils. The soil has to be aerated for the seeds to grow. And if I could give you a bit of a feedback, this year was the first time I actually put raised beds in my garden. I have about a 50-foot by 30-foot garden in the back. I live in the city of Sault Ste. Marie. And I can't believe how much better my salad and everything grew. When you have raised beds, they're not like, when it rains, they're not saturated, and I don't have carrots that are half the size when it comes down to fall. And it's amazing how much growth, and if that's a testament to tile drainage, the principle is the same, raised beds or tiles. It limits the growing season workability of soils, slows the rise in soil temperature in the spring, lowers the bearing capacity of the soil, damages seeds and seedlings. There are seeds, imagine if you're able to there's a dry spell of 2 to 3 weeks in May, and you get out there and you plant everything. There are seeds that if you get a sudden flooding as we did, if they're saturated for 24 to 48 hours, you could foreseeably lose that whole crop, the whole investment of your seeds. So that tile drains are like an insurance on your investment. Limits the depth of food penetration, and there's reduced the survival of plant rate. When we look at drainage, there's 2 types. There's surface drainage and subsurface drainage. If you can, for the most part, if you could slope your terrain or install ditches. I spoke to one farmer who had an interesting philosophy. What he does in the fall, he digs out the ditches, so this right here, they drain out quicker in the spring. And then in the fall, he fills them back up. But that's very labor intensive, and at the same time, that swath that you install the ditch is unproductive. You can't really seed anything there. Whereas when you install a sub-drainage system, you're able to grow everything on top. You're basically utilizing that whole space. And when you start putting ditches about 50 feet apart, you can appreciate 50 feet apart, your ditch is about 10 feet. That's 20% reduction in your capacity. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some people that are thinking, if you work on your math, that if you have a series of ditches, it might be actually better to put in tile drains and fill in your ditches to get that extra capacity. When it comes down to subsurface drainage, mold drains, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's more I've seen it in Europe. It's only good for heavy clays, and what that does is there's a tractor that basically pulls a torpedo, and because the clay is so hard, that hole will actually provide drainage over time. But the only problem is that depending on what type of clay you have, generally after 5 years, that hole collapses, and then you're back to square one and you have to redo it. Tile drains we'll discuss more. And dewatering wells is not really something that people consider when it comes down to farming, but we threw in there because it is a subsurface drainage. Principles of tile drainage, you can see there's many different types. It's more to familiarize yourself with tile drainage for those people that don't. But there's parallel, there's the herringbone, a double main system, and random. If you got a low spot in the corner of the farm that you want to drain properly. And there's a lot of sides to this. It's not something that, you could be a self-installer. You could install these yourself, but you've got to be very careful. There's a lot of principles. It's the type of soils that you have, the conductivity, the spacing, how tight do you put it, how deep do you put it, what kind of slope. Because the potential there is if you design it correctly, it could blow out. If you have a high rainfall and you have and your tile drains are running fast, you could have a blowout, you could have a washout at the same time. So that's why, and David will go through it, there's the province of Ontario is very good in that regard, in that they're licensing, making sure that the contractors understand the business and they do good work. So the benefits of tile drainage, the advantages, obviously extends the growing season. You're able to get on the property earlier and you can get off later. You got better working conditions at both seeding and harvest. You got reduced soil erosion, minimized maintenance. Again, it's not running out through your ditches. Increased return on investment, as we'll see a little further later, with greater economic growth. And I forgot to mention one point, that this report could not have been possible, not only with Conestoga Rovers and Associates, but with Trivers. He was our partner, and he brought a lot of wealth with regards to local knowledge. And the reason why I forgot to mention Colin is this last point: decreased farmer frustration, aggravation, stress, and overall improved health outlook. And that's key for attracting new farmers. If you don't have tile drains and you got pouring rain, to me, I'm thinking I would cry, okay? But when you have tile drains, it provides that insurance. It gives you a level of comfort knowing, my tile land's going to survive better with any rain event. Tile drainage installation requirements. There's 4 basic steps. You need to get the contractor. Generally, the contractor goes out because he does his own survey. He'll go out with a 4-wheeler, take shots on your property and see the lay of the land. And at the same time, they'll give you a costing, so you can do a quick little feasibility study. He'll do a layout design, and it could be systematic, random, filter, non-filter. If you got silts, he would recommend putting a filter on the tile drain, and the spacing. And then we'll have to look at permits, whether there's a municipal drain, a road, utility crossing. Rain was looking into putting tile drains on their the demonstration farm, which was about 10 acres. And you're beside MTO, and there's a lot of challenges, and it could be a $250 permit, it could be another $500 permit. So that's something that needs to be looked at. And then the installation. Even when you get to the point where you're able to have all your homework done, now you've got to wait for the weather to be good to install. You can't install in the winter time. It's very difficult to install in the spring for that matter too. And if you talk to Tate, as I have, from his experience, the earliest you could actually tile in the Algoma district is July, August. So tile drains considerations, some things that you need to know. Yield return, we'll go through. I highlighted the ones that we're going to go through in detail, and the rest are kind of straightforward. Root growth, I thought it was worthy to show you a frame on that. Drainage outlet, like as I said, if you're in a low-lying land, you need to have relief for drainage. So it could be a municipal drain, it could be a waterway. Insulation costs, I mentioned that it's generally running about $1,000 an acre. Soil erosion potential, we already touched on. Contractor availability, as I mentioned, they're all in Southern Ontario. Nutrient management is probably the biggest issue that I spoke to farmers in terms of their concerns with regards to tile drainage. Maintenance considerations, crop risk reduction insurance, and property improvement taxation. Go through each one. OMAF, Agri-Corp, when they compare tiled lands to untiled lands, there's generally a 20 to 40% increase in yield. So that's from their records. The general consensus among the farming industry is that you typically get returns of 20 to 50%. And only in special applications have you even seen distinct advantages of up to 500% yield increases. And the only thing I'll kind of reference there is the Holland Marsh, where you take a wetland and you drain it, and now you got great soil for growing conditions. So there's definitely an increase in yield of 20 to 50, let's say 20 to 50%. And if there's any more to comment on that, it's very difficult. There's been studies, but nothing's been conclusive, because to compare your property, let's say this year versus next year, and you install tiles for the following year, it's very difficult because the climates are different, right? The weather, the seasons are different. People's soils are different. Even if you've got two identical lands side by side, it's difficult because there's different nutrients. So that's why there isn't anything firm to say you got 30%. It's variable, and it's generally 20 to 40%. And the crops susceptible to water damage, all agricultural and horticultural crops, root crops, cereals, legumes, these two would greatly benefit from tile drainage. From a medium standpoint, cereals and legumes, and lower is grass and limited extensive grazing, or hay for that matter. When it comes down to root growth, I kind of mentioned about my raised bed. Tile drain keeps soil voids free of excess water. It permits air to flow through the soils and allows that important biological process to take place. It provides a stable, controllable water table for a healthy plant growth. And crops are more drought resistant as it creates deeper roots. So here you've got two pictures. Here is untiled land, and what happens is in the spring you install your seeds, and your water table would be pretty high. Well, come July, your water table drops, and your roots have gone horizontal and not deep. And this is what would kill the crop, because they would die of obviously lack of water. In a tile drain land, it stabilizes the water level, and those deeps go down a lot deeper. Remember this picture as I talk about nutrient growth. Now, farms, I'll have to go through this because farms are considered non-point sources in source water protection, which poses a threat to water quality. It's recognized. We've done source water protection for many municipalities. We look at the steel plant, we look at industry as being a contributor, we look at stormwater flow. Farmers and farms are a potential threat when you look at the nutrients that are discharged. The current perception is that tile drainage creates a release of phosphorus and nutrients. And we went to a conference, it was about a month or 2 months ago, and there was a perception that there was greater dissolved phosphorus that's discharged from tile drainage, but there's no studies to substantiate it. And I think the key message that we need to come out of here are farms are not leak-proof. Nutrients flow overland just as much as below the ground, depending on the soil type. And the greater nutrient uptake is strongly affected by plants with greater root masses. So if we go back to the picture, if you have greater root mass, you're actually able to retain a lot of the nutrients before it gets discharged. If you have surface land flow, a lot of the nutrients could be possibly released. But I think what's critical to everything is the nutrient management plans that just came out in the early 2000s. By having a nutrient management plan, it will greatly assist the reduction of nutrient release. When you know how much nutrients you have in your soils, and possibly even my recommendation when I was talking to our ag group is that there might be some advantage to sampling your outfall from your tile drains. Because if you're getting increased nutrients leaving your tile drains, you may want to cut back on your nutrient application. So what's really key is the applications, the timing, when you put your manure or your fertilizer, the application rates, and your tillage practices. Again, going back to the farms are not leak-proof, so you need to manage your nutrients. And here's one type of structure that's been used in tile fields. So what this does is, so your tiles will be connected to a header, and it would go to a discharge, whether it's a waterway. And what this does is, it's like a baffle effect. So you don't necessarily have to recognize that if your tiles are down 5 feet, you don't have to drain necessarily the full 5 feet. You could actually back up the water so that you're able to maybe in the spring, because your seeds are up here, reduce it down a foot, have it a foot below the top of the soils, and then slowly drop it as the root mass is grown. So this is an interesting structure that helps to reduce nutrients from being discharged. Maintenance, as with any infrastructure, there's always maintenance. So there's increased wear and tear damage on farm machinery such as tractors and combines due to wet, undrained farms. Actually, that's an advantage with regards to tile drains. There's tile blowouts due to improper tile installations. I mentioned that if you don't design it properly, you could have a blowout. So that's why it's very critical to get a licensed contractor. Heavy machinery has the potential of crushing tile, particularly in wet conditions, depending on how deep the tiles are. You should regularly inspect the tiles, but they require very little servicing. And crop roots, if you can appreciate, the crop roots can eventually get into the tiles over time and eventually render them useless. But for the most part, tile drains are expected to survive and last about 25 to 40 years. So when you get into the return on investments of 5, 10, even 15 years, there's a lot more years, especially if you're a young farmer, in terms of getting your investment back. And when it comes down to burrowing animals, there's nothing, all you need to do is put a grate over them. When I spoke to AMPAC, these are the 2012 rates, which will be reassessed in another 2 years, every 3 years they reassess it. And you can see how the tax implications are. Untitled farmland is about $400 an acre. When you upgrade it to a tile land, it jumps to $900. Now, with the increase in farmers, we're starting to see a slow trend. And again, the movement of Mennonites and farmers from southern Ontario up to this area, we're starting to see the prime land as being $1,500 to maybe up to $2,000. So something that needs to be considered is when you install tile drains, there's going to be tax implications. You're upgrading your property no different than you're finishing a basement. You are upgrading your property. And I make a note here. Tile installation by a licensed contractor increases the value of the property. There are farmers that were saying, you know what, I could install my tiles half the price. I could do it myself. You could purchase a machine that's about $30,000 to $50,000 and install it yourself. Granted, that can be done, and it's legal within the province of Ontario. However, when it comes down to selling the property, you might have high returns. But if you have two identical properties and one's installed by a licensed contractor that has a plan, a figure with a tile drainage and has all his paperwork versus the one that did it himself, obviously there's an increased value in the property that's done by the licensed contractor. Just jumping out of drainage, back to crop storage, as I mentioned, it was an add-on to the project. The advantages of farm storage. By having a grain bin, by having a barn, you avoid selling grain when the prices are at a seasonal low. You could hold on to it and utilize the margins. Avoid the waiting lines at the local elevator. And one component there is a lot of trucks are bringing supplies up to Northern Ontario and they're going back empty. And if you're able to utilize one of those transports and bring down your grains, you're able to utilize a discounted price for that return trip. Helps manage income for taxes. Well, if you had a bumper crop year, you don't have to sell everything in October, November. You could hold on to it, and it's a great tax deferral process. And allows more control over harvest operations. With regards to limitations of farm storage, well, there's extra grain handling required when you're storing on farm. There's increased risk when storing grain. There's spoilage, theft, fire. And it limits the ability to lock in a price by phone and deliver to a buyer for payment. There's a fixed cost over and above interest cost of farm storage, whether facilities are used or not. If you have, if you have a grain bin that you're paying it off at 6% and you're holding on to your grains, you can appreciate there's a cost associated with it. So until you actually sell it. And difficult weather, excessive snow, rain may prevent immediate delivery. Granted, prices might be high in January, February, March, but that's also our worst time to deliver products, so that you got to keep that in mind. As part of our study, we looked into trying to reduce the cost of tile drainage, and that was a chore in and of itself. The greatest one is a contractor procurement process. By having lands, by coming together as a consortium, instead of having a voice of just 10 acres as David had, it's hard to get the contractor to come up to do 10 acres. But now when you put 5,000 acres together, now you have interest from the contractors to want to come up here and work in certain areas. So there's definitely savings to combine acreages over areas because there's reduced mold and demold. Joint projects, same thing as sole sourcing contractors. There are 100 licensed contractors. We understand that Tate is very familiar with the area. There's a new one, Howard Acton, out of Espanola. He's got a chain tile installer. And I spoke to about a half a dozen others, and they said, you know what, Rob, yeah, we definitely like to be included if there's a request for a bid, because right now we're busy, but you know what, we might come up to Northern Ontario. So there is interest by other contractors that come up. We actually looked at tile procurement. Can we buy the tile at a discounted rate? Can we buy 5,000 acres worth of tile to save money? And the most we were able to save is 3 to 7% on bulk purchases, which is kind of insignificant. And when I was speaking to contractors, different contractors use different tile manufacturers. And despite the fact that tiles are all made to the same standard, this contractor prefers Armtec, this contractor prefers Big O. They all have their allegiances, one to Northern Piping. So there wasn't much of an advantage to buying all the tile in advance, because it's kind of useless to have it sit out there until you get the contractor. We looked into off-peak time installation. Is there a certain time of the year that the tiles could be installed, maybe when it's a slow period in Southern Ontario? Unfortunately, these contractors are running silly. They're busy. And they're installing in the summer and they're pushing right into the winter. So unfortunately, we're in a seller's market. The contractors are in the driver's seat when it comes down to installations. Tile spacing consideration. Recognized as a cost savings for yourself, you might say $1,000 an acre, 50 acres, $50,000. I don't have $50,000. But if you have $25,000, you may want to consider going a greater spacing. Go with 60 or 80 foot spacing, which is half the design requirement, and say, you know what, I could afford $25,000 and see how it goes. Evaluate yourself how great a return the tile drainage is, and then maybe come back and do interstitial installations, as many other many other farmers that already have tiles are requesting right now. And as I mentioned, self-installation, you could do it yourself, but there's limitations: design, quality, and return on sale, as I mentioned already. This is the first return on investment sheet that we did as part of our study. And what we did was we looked at soybean, canola, corn, and wheat, the typical crop yields, the percent yield increases based on the cost per bushel, the additional annual return, and the investment at 0% interest in terms of return on investment. And I've highlighted it because for the most part you can see that we're in the return on investment generally 6 to 11 years is a return on investment. So 10 seems to be the magic. 10 seems to be the magic time frame to maintain. This was the initial one that we did for the study, recognizing that not everybody plants soybeans. I don't know if there's anybody plants just soybeans every year, or canola. You have to do a crop rotation, otherwise you're going to have nutrient depletion. So David and Saul, through rain and they'll speak on their behalf because this is something they'll offer to you as well. What they did was ran through a cash crop rotation. There's actually two scenarios. One's a cash crop, and the other one's a mixed crop. And what they did was, they looked at 100 acres of tile drainage at $1,100 an acre, and a rotation of canola, wheat, soybeans, and grain corn. I'll just kind of show it to you here how they kind of broke it out with the spreadsheet. Canola, wheat, soybean, corn. Canola, wheat, soybean, corn in that rotation. So, based on that, at 0% interest with a 20% increase, it was an 8-year return. At a 30% increase, there's a 6-year return. If you utilize the existing OMAF program, which again David will go through, the payback is 11. By the way, there was a down payment of $11,000, which is 10%. Payback was 11 years, and a 30% increase, there's 9 years. So from a differentiation, there's definitely, like when you're given 0% interest, that 6% difference, there's a quicker payback. And so every farmer in Algoma needs to have, they need to have this advantage. They need to have anything that could help them, and the 0% interest is something that's very lucrative. They also ran another scenario with a 3% interest and partial forgiveness of loan at 3%. It can be forgiven after 5 years. And with that scenario, we got a payback of 8 years and 7 years, depending on the percent yield increase. We ran these, and we showed the previous slide. We did a presentation to the funders at NOHFC. They're in a time of, I don't want to say turmoil, but they're in a time of change. Their programs are changing. And they're really interested in our study, and they have to work the numbers. That's why, we can give them all the scenarios that we want. What we've really come to show is that to improve the drainage infrastructure of farmland is improving the infrastructure of Algoma and creating work and doing a lot of good things. So again, they looked at mixed crops. Again, taking 100 acres and the rotation: alfalfa, canola, wheat, soybean, grain corn, canola, alfalfa. So that in that rotation. And again, the scenarios with the 0% interest, 8-year return versus 11, 30 with the existing program, 7 years versus 9 years on the 0% versus 6% existing program. Same thing with the loan at 3% interest and partial forgiveness. Again, these are scenarios that we kind of threw at NOHFC and FedNor. Obviously, we're at their mercy in terms of what kind of funding formula they'll have, but it's very important that when they do come out with a funding formula, that we have a commitment from farmers as to what they want to go with. And again, I don't want to speak on David's behalf, but this is something in the questionnaire sheet that's been given to you. They're willing to help work the financials for you and see if what's more lucrative for yourself. Crop storage investments, as I said, by holding on to grains and selling it at a higher value, they've been typically known to provide a return on investment of about 5 years. That's almost like a guarantee. But the key is to get into your grain bins, you need to grow it. You need to fix your first infrastructure is your tile drains. Your second is your storage. And somewhere in between there maybe even be your machinery. That's considered part of your infrastructure as well. And when you're considering grain commodity prices can fluctuate up to 25%, you look at a peak time in the fall versus the springtime, there's as much as a 25% increase. And how would you like to sell your corn at a 25% profit by holding on to it for a few months? We looked at pricing. We provided average pricing for grain bins. Again, people have shown interest in terms of cold storage, grain bins, grain cleaners. We gave typical prices. We called various suppliers, Of biggest interest here is, I would say, the cold storage and flash freezing. That's a pretty significant investment. You're looking at 2 to 10 million, depending on the size of your facility. And there's a lot of logistics when it comes down to freezing and cold storage, and that goes down to food safety and traceability. Funding opportunities, you got your banks. You have the interest rates vary over time and depend on the individual's farmer's financial situation. The Canadian Agricultural Loan Act is a loan guarantee that provides farmers easy access to credit up to $500,000. The tile loan program, I'm not going to go into this much because David will present it a little bit more in detail, but you could actually access a loan through your municipality for a tile drainage installation. It's currently a 10-year loan with a 6% fixed rate, and that's for 75% of the cost of the installation, up to $50,000. And right now, this program is being underutilized. Obviously, the numbers really don't show too much in terms of return on investment, but for those people who can't get funding, it is an option. And what's interesting about this, and here, like I said, here's 97 to 2005, those were the only records that NOHFC provided. Algoma only tapped into 70% of the available funding at that time. And I have to admit, during this time period, it was, when you look at the census farms, it wasn't really an opportunity to get into farming. So it was like you offer a program when there's a decline in farming. If we look at recent NOHFC funding in agriculture, by the way, NOHFC continues to fund tile drainage on a case-by-case basis. But since 2008, only $254,000 was allocated. Of the approximately, it was like, I think when you add up all these numbers, it's about $4.5 million. Okay, so Algoma only tapped into 6% of the available funding during this period. So, mid-90s, late 90s, mid-2000s, you can appreciate we're here in we're here in 2013, going into 2014, and it's almost like that cyclical pattern. It's like, you know what, Algoma farmers are kind of due, and with the study confirming that there's 5,000 acres, there's definitely demand. Job creation potential, there's potential to form alliances and partnerships with existing contractors. Tate told me on the phone on Friday he's willing to partner up with anybody. He's got 5 machines, and he's willing to support the north. But the problem is 5,000 acres, unfortunately, doesn't represent a lot. It's a continuous installation. It would be about a year to 2 years if the weather was favorable. That's how much of an installation it would be. So to really get into this business, you have to look at Northern Ontario. You have to look at more the pan approach. There's potential for, again, by providing incentive to put in tile drains, more people might look into preparing their lands and clearing. There's some cost incentives there in job creation. Attracting new farmers, increasing farm succession. The farmer that has tile drain lands is more apt to pass on the farm to his son if there's tile drains, compared to the farmer who doesn't have tile drains, and his son's going to see a dead end, because he's going to look at that investment and say, is this a profession I want to get into? Secondary jobs, there's processing, trucking, storage, vehicle maintenance, marketing, and sales. I'll give you the analogy of SR, Algoma Steel. Used to say for every one person that worked at the plant, there was 8 spin-off jobs. There was the barber, the baker, the banker. And from a farmer perspective, that same analogy applies. For every dollar you raise, you're helping all these people, all these professions. So unlike, and that's the challenge that, fortunately, the hurdle we've got over, when it comes down to funding, they generally look at, say, oh, okay, we'll give you $1 million and we'll create 10 jobs for 5 years. In farming, you can't do that. And that's why it's very important for agricultural growth. Increased revenue is a better indicator measure for economic growth. When it comes down to funding considerations, storage projects can be implemented quickly. You want to put in a grain bin, $30,000, you can get the funding and run with it. Tile drainage installations require greater time to implement. It's based on the availability of the contractor, gaining access and approvals from the various utilities, or whether it's transportation or the municipality. There's a potential you might need a municipal drain to dewater your property, and weather restrictions. I know David's been asking for it since September, if not earlier, and we probably won't get Tate to come up to Newland till spring, summer. So an effective funding program should be available for a minimum of 5 years to allow for farmers to take advantage of the funding. You know, it's not going to be a one-year program. There has to be a long-term investment if we want to become sustainable. I'm just wrapping up. I think there's 2 or 3 slides left. So, you look at the total financial expenditure of the infrastructure, drainage infrastructure improvement. If you multiply 4983, that's the total number of acres the farmers that request tile drainage. At 1,100, 5.5 million. Land preparation. There's some people going to be wanting to clear land and try to take advantage of it. Ballpark about 100,000. And storage infrastructure upgrades is approximately $900,000. We did not include the cold storage or freezer because it's almost like going to the funding and say we need $50 million. It's not really unrealistic. But this is very realistic, and this investment would be about $6.5 million in total. And when you take into account that you could increase your yield, your crop yields by 20 to 40%, and you have a storage component, a grain bin, and you could increase your yield there 20 to 25%, all of a sudden you've got some pretty significant return on investments. And I don't know if I should even, I'll just touch on, because this was more presented to the funders. We mentioned about having half the money, so half the 6.5 million is 3.25 million, of a forgivable loan of 50-50 funding over a 3 to 5 year period. Half the funding as a low to no interest loan over 10 years. And again, these are things that we're asking for. What we're ultimately going to get, we won't be able to see until probably January, February. We also asked for $650,000, representing 10% of the capital funding to utilize a grower consortium to administer tender both tile and storage requirements within Algoma over a 3 to 5 year period. So that's a 10% more or less administration to actually run this program, because NOHFC wouldn't be able to handle a project of this magnitude. And $400,000, recognizing that this is just Algoma, but we are one of 10 northern districts. Cochrane, Ulisker, there's a lot of other people that are aching for money that are in the same predicament as we are. We thought we should open this and make it more pan-Northern Northern Ontario. And we also suggested that they allocate $400,000 to conduct an agricultural infrastructure needs for the remaining northern districts. Recognizing that the other districts can sure use some tile drainage improvements as well. That's it in a nutshell. There's a 8-month study, 1.5-inch thick report, feedback with a lot of farmers. Again, I just want to say thank you. Your feedback was instrumental in terms of doing the study. And my only hope, and cross my fingers, is that the funding gods look favorable on the request, and that they're able to allocate some funds to support farming in Algoma District. Thank you.